The first thing I noticed was the smell. Thick, chemical, bitter. As I stepped out my back door with a mug of coffee in hand, ready to enjoy some rare Saturday peace, I froze. My pool, the one I'd just had resurfaced, was glowing a sickly shade of blue-green and floating on top. A greasy film of paint. Latex paint, gallons of it. I dropped the mug. "Are you kidding me?" I muttered, staring at the disaster in disbelief. "My name's Griffin Elden. I'm a contractor by trade, moved into this neighborhood 3 years ago after finally saving enough to buy a place with a decent yard. Quiet street, good schools, and unfortunately, a homeowners association run by a woman who makes Voldemort look like a camp counselor. Her name? Debra Finwick, 60. Platinum bob haircut, drives a pearl-white Lexus, and walks around with a clipboard like she's scouting for Olympic infractions. Debra is the HOA president, and she treats the position like she was elected to Congress. She's the type who leaves notes if your trash bins are visible for more than 30 seconds past pickup. She once cited me for having overly expressive Halloween decorations. But this was next level. The paint was everywhere. It had sunk into the grout lines, clung to the walls, even stained the new coping I'd installed last month. I stormed around the side of the house, fuming, and that's when I noticed my security camera, mounted right above the gate. I rushed inside, pulled up the footage on my laptop, and there it was. Time-stamped, clear as day, Debra Finwick. In a wide-brimmed hat, sunglasses, and gloves, carrying 2 5-gallon buckets of blue paint. She popped the latch on my side gate. She'd done it before to leave violation notices and walked right into my backyard. No hesitation. She hoisted the first bucket and dumped it straight into the deep end like she was watering plants. Then she did it again. I sat there, jaw clenched, breathing through my nose like a bull about to charge. There was no note, no explanation, just Debra casually committing felony vandalism like she was cleaning up the community. I called the police. Officer Ramirez showed up within the hour. I showed him the footage. He watched it twice, then looked at me like he was waiting for Ashton Kutcher to jump out of a bush. But no, this was real. He asked if I knew why she would do this. I had a theory. A week earlier, I'd installed a new privacy fence along the rear corner of my backyard. Completely within code, measured twice, approved by the city, but Debra didn't like it. She said it clashed with the neighborhood's aesthetic. I told her the neighborhood's aesthetic didn't pay for my lumber or labor. She threatened to take care of it. I thought she meant another fine. Apparently, she meant dumping 10 gallons of paint in my pool. "I'll file the report," Officer Ramirez said, shaking his head, "but this isn't just a civil matter. That's criminal mischief at minimum, possibly property damage over $2,500. Try over 10 grand, I said. He raised an eyebrow. New plaster, new sealant, new pool lights, all ruined. "Then we're talking felony," I nodded. "Good, let her explain that to the judge." The next day I got a knock on the door. It wasn't the police, it was Debra. Wearing a pastel cardigan, sunglasses on her head like she was headed to brunch, and holding that same clipboard like it was a badge. "Griffin," she said, like we were old friends. "We need to talk." I folded my arms and leaned against the doorframe. "You mean about the felony you committed in my backyard?" "That wasn't vandalism," she said, waving her hand. "It was corrective action." I blinked. "Corrective what?" "You installed a non-compliant fence. I warned you it didn't meet HOA standards. I left notices." "You ignored them." "I followed city code. I even sent you the permit, and we don't have a listed standard for fence color or material." She pressed her lips together like she'd tasted something sour. "We're working on updating those guidelines." I laughed. "You're not a city inspector. You're not a judge. You're the president of a neighborhood HOA, Debra. That doesn't give you the right to trespass and destroy private property." I was acting in the best interest of the community. I stepped out onto the porch. "You dumped paint in my pool because you didn't like my fence." "That's not community leadership, that's psychotic." Her eyes narrowed. "I suggest you stop this nonsense before it escalates." "Oh, it already has," I said, pulling my phone from my pocket. Police reports filed, security footage is backed up. And by next week, you'll be dealing with more than an angry homeowner. You'll be dealing with a judge." Her smile faltered. I shut the door in her face. 2 days later, I got a call from Detective Lyles with the County Property Crimes Unit. He'd reviewed the report and footage and wanted to confirm a few things. By the time we finished our call, he told me he would be requesting charges for felony criminal mischief and trespassing. That same day, I called my lawyer, a college buddy named Martin who now specialized in property law. He'd dealt with HOAs before, loved making them sweat. "This is open and shut," Martin said after watching the tape. "She's cooked." But Debra wasn't done. That evening, I got a notice from the HOA. A formal violation citing my unauthorized pool color alteration and non-compliant landscaping due to blue water runoff. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the letter. She was trying to fine me for the damage she caused. I posted a copy of the violation and the security footage on the neighborhood Facebook page. Within an hour, it had over 200 comments. Turns out, I wasn't the only one Debra had targeted. There was a retired couple she fined for having improperly shaped hedges. A single mom she reported for excessive driveway chalk art. Someone even said she'd once measured the length of their wind chimes. People were done. By the end of the night, a petition had started circulating. Not just to remove Debra as HOA president, but to dissolve the HOA entirely. By Monday morning, the neighborhood was humming like a kicked beehive. Everyone had seen the footage. The story had seeped into every porch conversation, every dog walking route, and every group chat in the HOA's once pristine little kingdom. Debra Finwick, the woman who once fined a man for having mismatched holiday lights, had become the subject of meme-worthy ridicule. Someone even photoshopped her face onto a paint can and posted it on the community bulletin board outside the clubhouse. But the real show was just getting started. At 9:42 a.m., a marked cruiser pulled up in front of her house. Detective Lyles stepped out with a folder tucked under his arm and rang her doorbell. I watched from across the street, leaning on the hood of my truck. Debra opened the door, stiff and upright, like someone expecting a Girl Scout and getting the IRS instead. He handed her a document. She didn't take it. She stood there, lips tight, arms crossed. Lyles waited. Eventually, she reached out, grabbed the paper, and read it. Her neck turned the color of sunburned skin. That was the arrest warrant. She wasn't taken in cuffs, not for this kind of charge, but she was cited formally and given a court date. The moment the cruiser pulled away, I saw her yank her front blinds shut with enough force to shake the window frame. That evening, I got a text from Martin, my lawyer. "Judge approved the civil summons. She'll be served within 48 hours. Now the criminal case was in motion, and the civil suit for damages was about to land on her doorstep. I wasn't just going after cleanup costs. I was going after labor, material loss, and the cost of having to drain and resurface the pool. The total came out to just north of $13,000. Martin said if we played it right, we could also pursue punitive damages for trespassing and harassment. I told him I'd settle for her paying every penny and stepping down from the HOA. He said, "Let's make sure it stings." The next day I went to work as usual. When I got home, there was a certified envelope shoved halfway into my mailbox. Inside was a letter from the HOA's Emergency Committee, a group I didn't even know existed. They claimed they were assuming temporary oversight of Debra's duties to minimize disruption. The letter, though dressed up with official-sounding phrases, was clearly damage control. Buried in the second paragraph was a gem. They were suspending all fines and violations issued in the past 30 days pending review. That included the nonsense violation Debra had tried to pin on me. I posted that to the Facebook group too. More neighbors came out of the woodwork. One woman uploaded a PDF of a noise violation she'd received after hosting a book club on her screened-in porch. A man posted a photo of a letter Debra had mailed him claiming his yard gnome was aesthetic pollution. The stories weren't just piling up, they were forming a wall. On Thursday afternoon, a white SUV with tinted windows rolled up to my house. Out stepped a man in a tailored navy suit and polished shoes. He identified himself as Mitchell Blackwell, Debra's attorney. "Mr. Elden," he said, "I'd like to discuss a possible resolution between you and my client." I stepped out onto the porch and didn't invite him in. "You mean the resolution where she pays for the damage she caused? She's prepared to offer a good faith settlement in exchange for withdrawing the civil complaint." I raised an eyebrow. "Is this before or after she explains to a judge why she trespassed onto private property with buckets of paint?" Blackwell adjusted his tie. "If we can settle this quietly, it might spare both parties unnecessary attention. Your client made this public the second she decided to turn my pool into an art project." He looked at me carefully. "She's willing to offer $7,000. That's more than half of your stated damages." "Not interested," I said. "I'm not negotiating with someone who still thinks she did the community a favor. You understand, if this goes to trial, I'll be there in a suit and tie with the footage queued up." He paused, then nodded. "Very well. I'll inform my client." She was feeling the heat, that much was clear. The next morning, a new sign appeared at the HOA clubhouse. "Emergency HOA meeting, Friday, 6:30 p.m. It was the first open meeting in over a year. I showed up early. By 6:15, the room was packed. Folding chairs had been pulled from a storage closet, and people were standing along the back wall. Debra was nowhere in sight. Instead, 3 members of the board, including a guy named Bruce who usually kept his head down, sat at the front table looking like kids caught sneaking out of class. Bruce cleared his throat. "We're here to address recent concerns about HOA leadership and the incident involving a resident, Mr. Elden." I folded my arms and waited. We were unaware of the full extent of what occurred until this week. "After reviewing the footage and speaking with legal counsel, we've decided to call for a special election to replace the HOA president." People clapped. Someone shouted, "About time." Bruce continued, "Until then, all enforcement actions from the past 30 days are suspended. We will also begin reviewing our bylaws with the intent of limiting presidential authority in enforcement matters." I stood. "Are you also reviewing how someone managed to dump gallons of paint into a resident's pool without any accountability until the police got involved?" Bruce looked uncomfortable. "The board doesn't condone what happened, and we've issued a formal statement of disapproval to Mrs. Finwick." "Disapproval," I said. "She committed a felony." The room murmured in agreement. A woman near the front stood up. "My husband and I were fined $600 last year for installing solar lights. She threatened to place a lien on our home." Another man chimed in. "She made my wife cry over a garden flag." Bruce raised his hands. "We understand emotions are high. That's why we're proposing a full audit of the HOA's actions over the last 18 months. That got more applause. By the end of the meeting, residents were exchanging phone numbers, starting committee sign-ups, and even discussing the possibility of dissolving the HOA entirely. One retired attorney said he'd look into the legal steps required. For the first time since I moved in, people were actually talking like neighbors instead of tenants under surveillance. The next day, the sheriff's department served Debra with the civil suit. According to Martin, she called his office 3 times in 2 hours trying to negotiate a payout. She ended up settling for the full $13,000. No fight, no court hearing, just a check signed and delivered with a typed note that read, "This is not an admission of guilt." The same week, she was forced to resign from the HOA. Not just as president, she lost her board seat entirely in a unanimous vote. Her house went up for sale a month later. When the pool resurfacing crew finally finished cleaning and restoring everything, I held a backyard barbecue. Half the neighborhood showed up. Someone brought a sheet cake with "No more paint bombs" written in blue frosting. Kids splashed in the pool, adults swapped stories, and people laughed louder than they had in a long time. It didn't take long for a new board to be elected. This one wasn't interested in measuring grass height or approving patio umbrellas. They started by repealing half the fines from the last year. Then they rewrote the bylaws to prevent any one person from having too much authority. I kept the security camera above the gate. Not because I expected trouble, but because it had become a kind of quiet symbol. That no one gets away with using power to bully their neighbors, not in this corner of the world. And if they try, well, I still have the footage. A week after the barbecue, just as the last of the party streamers had been taken down and the scent of grilled ribs finally cleared from the air, I got a letter. Not one of those HOA flyers or passive-aggressive notes wrapped in a plastic sleeve, but an actual stamped envelope from the county clerk's office. I opened it expecting paperwork from the civil settlement. Instead, it was a subpoena. I was being called as a witness in the state's criminal case against Debra Finwick. Apparently, things had escalated quietly behind the scenes. When Detective Lyles submitted his report, he'd included not just the footage and my testimony, but the pattern of behavior that had emerged from other residents. Several of them had come forward with sworn statements, and one of them, an elderly veteran named Mr. Callahan, had something that changed everything. He'd installed a wildlife camera in his backyard months ago to track the raccoons that had been digging into his garden beds. What he captured instead was footage of Debra Finwick entering his property at night and spraying what turned out to be commercial-grade herbicide along his fence line. His flower beds had withered the next morning, and he'd assumed it was coincidence until he saw the footage on Facebook from my pool. He turned his footage into the sheriff's department. That triggered a deeper investigation. Turns out, this wasn't just about a vendetta over fences or gnomes. According to the prosecuting attorney, Debra had been using her authority to retaliate against residents who challenged her. And in several cases, she did it under the cover of night. Broken sprinkler heads, slashed garden hoses, even one incident where someone's car tires had been deflated. No fingerprints, no witnesses, but now, with video evidence and a pattern of behavior, they had enough to file multiple charges. I sat across from Assistant District Attorney Camille Rivas that Friday afternoon in a windowless office on the 10th floor of the county courthouse. "She's not just facing criminal mischief charges anymore," said Rivas, tapping her pen against the manila folder in front of her. "We've added felony counts for targeted vandalism, trespassing with intent to intimidate, and malicious destruction of property." She may have thought she was above the law because of her position, but this time she crossed a line we can't ignore. "She always acted like the neighborhood was her personal fiefdom," I said, "but I didn't think it went this deep." "She used her role to terrorize people," Rivas said. "People who couldn't afford to fight back or were too intimidated to speak up. It's textbook abuse of power." I agreed to testify, so did 3 others. 2 weeks later, the preliminary hearing was held. I wore a dark blue suit and sat in the second row while Debra entered the courtroom with her attorney, Mitchell Blackwell, trailing behind her. She looked smaller now, no clipboard, no smug posture, just a woman whose carefully constructed world was caving in around her. When I took the stand, I wasn't nervous. I told the truth plainly. The footage spoke louder than anything else. The prosecutor showed it to the court, then submitted the statement from the pool restoration company. The judge didn't ask any questions. He simply nodded, made a note, and called the next witness. By the time Mr. Callahan presented his wildlife cam footage, Debra's defense team stopped objecting. They knew the judge was already leaning toward a full trial. After the hearing, I went back to my truck and sat behind the wheel for a few minutes, watching people shuffle out of the courthouse. Debra exited last. She didn't glance at me. Her lawyer said something to her, but she didn't reply. I started the engine and headed home, not feeling triumphant, just clear. The damage she caused wasn't just measured in paint or fines. It was fear, stress, and the slow erosion of community trust. That weekend, I met with Bruce and 2 of the new board members. They were drafting new bylaws, and they wanted input from residents who'd been directly impacted. We sat around my patio table with notepads and iced tea, going over clause after clause. No board member can issue a fine without majority approval from the full panel, Bruce read aloud. What do you think? Good start, I said. But add a transparency clause. Every fine, warning, and complaint should be logged and viewable by residents, full access. The woman next to him, Dana, nodded. And a term limit. Nobody should be president for more than 2 years. We spent 3 hours redrawing the rules, line by line, making sure no one would ever have the kind of unchecked authority Debra had abused. By Monday, the draft was posted publicly. Residents began submitting feedback, and most of it was enthusiastic. Then, something surprising happened. A reporter from the local news station showed up at my door. Word had gotten out about the case, and the station wanted to cover how a small community turned around after being under the thumb of a rogue HOA leader. I agreed, but only if they spoke to other residents too. The segment aired the following week. It opened with a slow shot of the clean, sparkling pool, then shifted to interviews with Mr. Callahan, Dana, and even a couple who'd nearly moved out because of the harassment. It ended with a statement from the county prosecutor's office, confirming that the case was going to trial and that more charges might be added pending the outcome of the evidence review. The next morning, I found a handwritten note taped to my front door. No envelope. No return name. Just 5 words scrawled in faint pen, "You should have stayed quiet." I brought it straight to Detective Lyles. He didn't say much, just bagged it, logged the incident, and told me to keep the cameras rolling. I added 2 more around the perimeter of my property and installed motion sensor lighting along the side gate. A week passed. Then, too, the community remained calm. People were more neighborly than I'd ever seen. Kids played in front yards. One of the dads started organizing weekend soccer games at the park. People smiled more. Then, during a Tuesday evening walk with my dog, I noticed a moving truck in front of Debra's house. She wasn't there. According to the neighbor 2 doors down, her adult son had come to clear out what was left. The house had gone under contract and the buyer was already in escrow. She'd left town quietly with no goodbye. I didn't feel sorry for her, but I did feel something else: relief. Weeks later, the trial date was set. I was back in the courtroom, this time joined by several neighbors who were prepared to testify. Debra's lawyer tried to argue diminished responsibility, citing stress, medication changes, and the burden of civic duty. But the evidence was overwhelming. The prosecutor laid out her pattern of behavior, including late-night trespasses, targeted property damage, and manipulation of HOA authority for personal vendettas. Witness after witness described how she used her position to punish dissent. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 18 months probation, a court-mandated psychological evaluation, and ordered to pay full restitution to all victims, totaling just over $32,000 across 6 households. She also received a 2-year ban from serving on any homeowners association in the state. The court ordered a formal statement of apology to be mailed to each affected resident. Mine arrived in a plain envelope. No return address, just a single sheet of paper. It read, "I regret the decisions that led to these events. I accept the court's judgment and hope to rebuild my life in a better way." I folded the letter and put it in the drawer next to the original HOA violation notice she'd left me months ago. The neighborhood didn't just recover, it evolved. The new board launched monthly town halls, created an online suggestion box, and even organized a summer block party. The vibe changed completely. People who used to avoid eye contact now waved from their porches. As for me, I kept things simple. I worked during the day, relaxed by the pool in the evenings, and every now and then walked past the house where it all started, now owned by a young couple with a baby on the way. They planted sunflowers along the front walk, and not once did I see a clipboard. 3 months had passed since the trial ended, The sun had returned to its usual spot above our street, casting long golden beams across the freshly mowed lawns and newly planted flower beds that dotted the neighborhood. The silence that followed Debra's departure wasn't just an absence, it was a vacuum that allowed something new to breathe life into the community. The Homeowners Association, now under new leadership, had shifted gears entirely. They weren't just cleaning up the mess left behind, they were actively reaching out, asking for resident input, and most shockingly, actually listening. I'd been asked to help draft a new clause for homeowner privacy rights, and I agreed, mostly because I wanted to ensure no one else ever felt the way I had standing over a ruined pool with a useless cup of coffee in hand. But just as things were settling, something else came to light. It started with a letter not to me, but to Dana, one of the new board members. She knocked on my door one evening just after sunset, holding it in her hands like it was a live wire. "You have a minute?" she asked, eyes scanning the street behind her. I stepped aside without answering. She walked in but didn't sit down. Instead, she unfolded the letter on the kitchen counter. It was an invoice from a landscaping company. The kind of thing most folks would toss without a second glance, except it listed a billing address that didn't match any home in the neighborhood. Instead, it pointed to a commercial P.O. box in a city 40 minutes away. Dana tapped the corner of the paper. This was in the association's records, buried between a stack of old maintenance contracts. The company doesn't exist anymore, I frowned. Debra's signature on it? No. That's the thing, she didn't sign it. But guess who did? She slid over a second page, an approval form. The name at the bottom was Marcus Fielder, former HOA treasurer, a man who'd claimed to resign due to family obligations a month before Debra's trial. I hadn't thought about Marcus since the early days, mostly because he'd kept his head down and his name off most of the chaos. But now, what's the total? I asked. Dana leaned in. That invoice alone is for $2,800. But I've already found 5 like it, all to companies that either don't exist or were dissolved years ago. That's over 15 grand. I looked at her. You think they were stealing from the HOA fund? She nodded. And I think Debra wasn't alone. What followed was a week of digging. Dana, Bruce, and I worked late at night, combing through old records and comparing them to bank statements we had managed to recover from the association's prior accountant. The deeper we went, the more rot we uncovered, dozens of payments to shell companies. Reimbursements marked as emergency beautification or infrastructure assessments that led nowhere. One transaction had been processed 3 times under different dates with identical amounts. When we finally tallied it, the figure was undeniable. Over $62,000 unaccounted for, all drained over a 2-year span. We brought everything to the county financial crimes division the next morning. Detective Lyles met us outside the station. He looked over the folder Dana handed him, flipping through the documents with the kind of expression that only came from seeing something worse than he expected. "Looks like we've got ourselves a racketeering case," he said, closing the folder. "And if these signatures hold up, this wasn't just one person." "Can you trace the money?" Bruce asked. "We'll issue subpoenas for the accounts. If it went through any financial institution, and I'm betting it did, we'll find it." For a while, we didn't hear much. Investigations like this take time, and the authorities didn't want to tip their hand. In the meantime, our neighborhood kept rebuilding. New families moved in, and the new HOA board launched a monthly newsletter not to issue warnings, but to highlight good neighbors, share gardening tips, and list local events. People started putting up porch swings again. Someone hosted a chili cook-off that ended in a 3-way tie and a burst garden hose. Then, in early October, the first arrests were made. Marcus Fielder was taken into custody at his new job, a car dealership 2 towns over. The news spread fast not because people were shocked, but because it confirmed what many had begun to suspect. The second arrest came 2 days later, a woman named Cheryl Lang, who used to handle the HOA's accounting and had quietly relocated to a condo in the city. But the biggest shock came next. Debra was arrested again, this time not for paint buckets or trespassing, but for felony fraud, conspiracy to commit embezzlement, and falsifying public records. Turns out, she hadn't just looked the other way, she'd helped create the fake companies used to siphon off the money. Her name was linked to the registration of 3 LLCs filed in neighboring counties, all using aliases and dead P.O. boxes. The news made the local paper's front page. Her mugshot, once a face of prim control and artificial charm, now showed a woman caught in the wreckage of her own schemes. A grand jury indicted all 3 on multiple felony counts. Prosecutors claimed they had enough evidence to show a deliberate effort to defraud the HOA and its members. The trial was scheduled for the following spring, but the damage had already been done. Members of the community began attending board meetings in record numbers. The treasurer's responsibilities were split into 3 separate positions, each with oversight controls. A neighborhood audit committee was formed, open to any resident who wanted to make sure the books stayed clean, and me. I finally finished the backyard project I'd put off for 2 years, a small gazebo near the shallow end of the pool, complete with string lights and a fan that hummed quietly through the warm evenings. I built it myself, and every time I sat under it, drink in hand and dog curled at my feet, I thought about how close we'd come to letting that kind of corruption fester unchecked. One afternoon, Dana stopped by again, this time with her daughter in tow, a gap-toothed toddler who immediately ran to my dog and tried to ride him like a pony. Dana handed me an envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "Refund checks," she said. The county recovered a portion of the stolen funds during the asset seizure. Not much, but enough to reimburse every homeowner a few $100. I opened mine. $293, just enough to feel symbolic. They actually got the money back, some of it, the rest. "Well, they're going after property liens next," I nodded. "Good, people should know there's a cost to this kind of thing." Dana looked around the yard. "You ever think about running for the board?" I laughed. "I think I've served my neighborhood in other ways." She smiled, then called for her daughter, who was now trying to drag my dog by the tail toward the pool. Later that night, I sat outside under the gazebo, watching the sky turn that soft, deep blue just before the stars came out. The wind rustled the hedges, and for the first time in a long time, there was no tension in the quiet. Just calm. The HOA had once been a symbol of fear, control, and manipulation. Now it was just a group of neighbors trying to do better, and Debra Finwick. She would spend the next several years navigating courtrooms and probation offices, stripped of the illusion of power she'd once wielded like a scepter. Justice didn't always come with flashing lights or dramatic endings. But sometimes it came with a camera above a gate, a few stubborn neighbors, and the refusal to be intimidated. And that was enough.